even in my very limited experience here in South Africa, a land of lovely wines and a passion for very funky-looking socks. A land that overflows with hospitality offered 1 cup of coffee at a time. You know a lot about extending acts of kindness. In the writing of the Bible, someone had to make specific decisions about how these stories would be conveyed. Different literary devices are used to create suspense and drama. Sometimes we, as the readers, know information about a character before the character knows the events. Sometimes the reader is the last to know. These literary devices pulse through the Bible narrative. In the telling of the Akedah, we, as the readers, know from the beginning that this is a story about a test. God sets out to test Abraham. It is a unique test for a unique individual. But Abraham also has a unique relationship with God. They chatted about various things. Abraham challenged God, negotiated with God. God promised to be with Abraham and to bless Abraham. They shared meals together, and God tells stories that cause both Abraham and Sarah to laugh. There are many situations in the Abrahamic stories that would demonstrate God's power and God's faithfulness. But certainly the highlight had to be the birth of Isaac to Abraham's 90-year-old wife, Sarah. The question was, would Abraham be able to remain faithful to God? As stated in Genesis 12:3, God had chosen Abraham and his descendants to bless the whole world. God needed to know whether Abraham was willing to give up the thing most precious to him in all the world for the sake of being faithful to God, who gave him that gift in the first place. I really cannot imagine anything as difficult as what God asked Abraham to do. I have 3 sons, and there were days when I could imagine throttling those boys, but I cannot fathom the anguish and the grief Abraham must have experienced. Yet, Abraham remains present. 3 times Abraham answers, "Here I am," always attentive to God, always attentive to his son Isaac. Likewise, 3 times in our story repeats, "God will provide." Abraham passes this most excruciating of tests, and God responds, "Now I know. Now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." The story of the Akedah makes a claim on us. All that we have, even our own lives, those of the ones we hold most dear to us, ultimately belong to God, who gave them to us in the first place. The story of the Akedah assures us that God will provide and that God will be present. God calls all of us to be faithful, even when the tasks set before us seem impossible, including tasks of dismantling systemic oppressive mechanisms, whether in the United States, Canada, or South Africa. The task of confronting climate change, as evidenced by the wildfires raging in North America or the floods here on the Eastern Cape. Just remember, none of us are being asked to sacrifice a child. We're only asked to be faithful, to do the next right thing, to act with compassion and integrity. Sometimes this can be difficult. Many things may look pretty bleak at any particular point in time, but we must trust that God has a plan. Our job is to stay faithful, not to allow the evil to convince us to be mean or hateful, for that is not God's way. There is a comedy series that I am particularly fond of called Ted Lasso, about a somewhat hapless American coach who is recruited to lead a premier professional British football team. In one particular episode, Ted tells his players that he believes in rom-communism. Rom-communism is based off the plot lines of romantic comedies, rom-coms, where everything works out at the end. In the show, Ted consoles his team when things look particularly bleak. He tells them everything works out at the end. If things haven't worked out, it's because you're not at the end. Our job is to stay true to our calling, to be faithful to God's work. I love our gospel passage this morning. Just before the 12 disciples head out in pairs to heal the sick, cast out demons, and preach the good news, God reminds them that even the smallest act of kindness, such as giving a drink of water to the least deserving, will be rewarded. Jesus knows, as does any good field ed supervisor, that the work that he has assigned his disciples is hard and it might not go so well, and that's okay. Be attentive to the small things, the things that you can do, because each act of kindness is evidence of our faithfulness. Each act of kindness matters and will create ripples of goodness upon which God will build God's holy kingdom, in which all people will flourish and justice shall reign. Even in my very limited experience here in South Africa, a land of lovely wines and a passion for very funky-looking socks, a land that overflows with hospitality offered one cup of coffee at a time, you know a lot about extending acts of kindness. May we, like Abraham, stay faithful to God's call on our lives, one small act of kindness at a time. In the words of the Belhar Confession, recited in churches around the globe, God has entrusted the church with the message of the reconciliation in and through Jesus Christ, that the church is called to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, that the church will be called blessed because its members are peacemakers, that the church is a witness by word and deed to the new heaven and the new earth where justice dwells. Amen.